Hello and welcome to another edition of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest is Kevin McKenna, Deputy Business Editor of the New York Times. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and occasional guest host of the show. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please like, please comment, please share, please retweet, do all the things to show people, to help people find the show so they can enjoy it. We're looking forward to a great show today. Um, we're welcoming back Kevin McKenna. Kevin was actually a guest multiple times in the early days, even before I started working with Sri about 6.5 years ago. And so they have a lot of catching up to do. So we're looking forward um, to having him join us. And again, of course, Kevin is the deputy editor of the New York Times. Sorry, of the business section of the New York Times, and he's been working with a great group of reporters. We're going to focus on some articles that he's helped oversee over the last several months. Um, and then there are also a number of articles that he's picked out that he wants to focus on in today's show. So we are going to enjoy that. Uh, Say hello to a couple folks who are watching. Jonathan is watching from the East Village. Jonathan, always great to see you. Patty is watching from New York, saying greetings from New York. Thank you, Patty. Doug Levy is watching from Tampa this time. He's on the wrong time zone. Doug is one of our friends that watches from the San Francisco Bay Area, from Marin County, and he's always up at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. I always make a big deal of that. Doug, you got to sleep in today. I hope you probably didn't. He's probably been up as early as I've been, but uh, not too far. And I'm curious of where you are. My mom's also in Tampa, so you can wave to each other, kind of. Mom is usually in New York, but she has a place in Tampa she goes to in the winter. So, Mom, thank you for watching. And we already have our first comment. Patty saying, "Welcome back to our special guest, Kevin." Uh, Ken Fisher is watching from Iowa. Ken, thank you so much. And a relatively new member of our New York Times read along family, Raja Gopalan, is watching on Facebook and says, "Good morning from New York City." So, with that, I'll bring on our host, Sri Srinivasan.
Good
Hi,
morning, Neil.
Sri.
Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you. It's cool in New York, and we are just delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you for joining us. We do this Sundays, 8:30 to 10 a.m. Eastern. We have great guests join us as we talk about newspapers. It's often, most always, the New York Times, but we did just last week the Wall Street Journal read along for the first time, and Jeff Horwitz, who was our guest, uh, previewed really what became a big news story for the week, which was the all the leaders of the tech companies being dragged in front of Congress. So that was really interesting. You can see all our shows on our archives at digimentors.group. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and also now on Instagram. And there's the story we did, the show we did last week with Jeff Horowitz. If you care at all about the damage social media is doing to all of us, please check out the show we did with him and his book, big book about the dangers at Facebook and all the social media companies. This show is brought to you by our friends at Muckrack, and we're very grateful to them. Muckrack.com, please check them out. And if you'd like to be a sponsor, please let us know. Sri at digimentors.group or Neil at digimentors.group. The show is also made by Neil and me and the Digimentors team, and we do shows like this, but we also do digital marketing, PR, training and workshops, staffing and recruiting if you want to hire digital folks. We also do gala and other event amplifications and our AI workshops. I created something called My Non-Scary Guide to AI. I've been teaching them around the country. You can see I used to have hair when I taught that. But if you're interested in that workshop, we can do customized versions online, in person. just let us know. Speaking of our shows, Neil has a new show that he's debuting on Thursday, and we want to show you that a little bit, tell you about that. It's called Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. Don Helmrich and Neil will be doing their introductions this Thursday, coming up February 8th at 7 p.m. So please check out that show, and we'll tell you more about it at the end of this show. So thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot to do today, very busy news week, and we'll be joined by Kevin McKenna in just a moment. He's the deputy business editor of the New York Times and a dear, dear friend. We are going to look at the paper. We're going to talk about his amazing career at the New York Times. And we're going to take your questions. If you're interested in knowing what goes on at the New York Times, there's no better person to talk to us about that than Kevin, because he's been there a very long time. He's a veteran who knows so much and helped launch, among other things, the New York Times on the web. So be ready for a great conversation. Before we do that, just want to quickly show you what's in the paper, or on the different sections, just very quickly give you a quick tour, and then we will bring on Kevin. So on the front page, you can see the lead stories. The UK and the US carry out blitz against the Houthis. And the top story here is, or the top image here is about Spanish bullfighting, no, Mexican bullfighting faces a mortal challenge, ethical and legal battles over animal rights. And you can see this right here. So we'll talk about that. The arts and leisure cover is experiencing a coming of age that never was, new fictional depictions of queer love. And the book review cover is Black Magic. Chester Himes was more than a great crime writer. He was a great American novelist. We're going to be talking about this story in particular because Kevin flagged it for us. Once a captive, now a watchful escapee. The story of Flacco, a Central Park Zoo escapee. And the Sunday opinion is, can you be the party of revolutionary change and the status quo at the same time? There's Ezra Klein on the Democratic Party, and there's a unusual image of the Democratic Party donkey. The New York Times Magazine cover is The Long Shadow of 1948, how the decisions that led to the founding of Israel left the region in a state of eternal conflict. The Sunday Styles cover also will be looking at, in print and online, Williamsburg Transformed. And the real estate cover is The Curmudgeon of Rivington Street, about Pearson Tyler Leonard, once a club kid, has stories to tell. One turned out to be valuable. And the Sunday Business cover, Kevin is, of course, the deputy business editor, so we'll be focusing on this section with him. BitBoy hits rock bottom. The crypto influencer Ben Armstrong lost his wife, his followers, and his Lamborghini. Great headline and a fascinating story. And the hottest job in corporate America, chief for AI. And Neil and I were involved with our friend David Matheson and the Chief AI Conference Summit in December. And if you're interested in that topic, you must check out CDO Club and all the programs that they have there. But I think we're now ready to bring on Kevin and to talk about the Sunday business section and so much more. So our guest is Kevin McKenna, who is the deputy business editor. His Twitter handle is KEMCKE, and we are delighted to welcome him back.
Hey,
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm well.
Nice to see you. Yeah, we usually get to meet in person, and we've done this show in person. We were able to do that because I used to live one block from you on the Upper West Side. Now I've moved all the way near the UN, so we haven't seen each other as much, but I'm delighted that you would spare part of your Sunday for us. Thank you very much. So tell us, are you a Sunday morning person?
I'm a morning person in general. It was not always so. I think the pandemic had something to do with that, getting up early in the morning so you could go downstairs when no one was around and go to the grocery store and things like that. So yeah, I get up pretty early and try to get some reading done. You know, it's gotten harder to actually get reading done on the print paper, that day's print paper in the morning, because it doesn't come as early as it used to. But yeah, that's my morning my quiet morning routine is generally getting reading done.
I certainly understand that. And you're right, before the pandemic and even during the pandemic, it used to, at least in our building on the Upper West Side, we used to get it by 5 a.m. And those
Yeah.
delivery folks are amazing to be able to do that right through the pandemic. Let's see, Naomi says, a beautiful day on the Upper West Side neighborhood. John Lee says, great to be bored from the Upper West Side of New York City. Susan's watching from finally a sunny day in Connecticut. And our friend Ron Thomas, former guest on the show, is watching from Dubai. Hi, Ron. Thank you so much for being here. And Patty says, although chilly, thank goodness for clear skies in New York. Folks, tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what your Sunday is like, and share this show with your friends. They can watch us live, or they can watch us. They'll start immediately on all the channels: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and now Instagram, as well as digimentors.group. Look for the New York Times read along over there. Here, Carl Levin says, hi, Kevin. Good morning from Texas.
Carl.
So you've got your friends joining. And Doug, who usually is in California, says, when I stepped out of my hotel this morning, I thought it was warm compared to usual, how cold it is in San Francisco. And Kevin has spent some time in the Bay Area and in California, so he'll tell us more about that. And Chris Gorman is watching from New York City. Chris is a deputy director at the American Folk Art Museum. Everyone must check that out. And Stefan is watching. Big hello to my old colleague and dear friend, Kevin. And so thank you so much, Kevin. Let's talk a little bit before we get into the paper. Tell us about your work there, and what does a deputy business editor do?
Well, there's several of us, and we share some departmental responsibilities. But in addition to that, the last, 7 years, I've worked with a group of reporters who cover the economy, transportation, energy, and lately retail. So, my colleague, a friend of yours as well, Vikas Bajaj, is an editor with me in the group, and it's been a wonderful group of reporters to work with, and actually a fascinating time over the last 6 years to look at the economy and how it's changing. Obviously, the pandemic turned things upside down. But anyway, it's a subject matter I really enjoy. One I never thought I would get into if starting in journalism. My goal was to be a political reporter, to go to Washington. I took a little bit. I started off going to a state capital, Raleigh, North Carolina, for a year as a reporter with the Associated Press, thinking that would get me to Washington. And then, as happens when you're in your 20s and you can do this, I just decided to, on something of a lark, go to Europe, and thinking I would stay 6 months maybe, or a year, and do some freelancing. And anyway, wound up happening into an editing job at an English language paper in Paris, and staying 6 years. So that was the pivot, the first pivot in my career from reporting to editing. And it was from there that I came to the Times, first on what was then known as the foreign desk, now the international desk. I didn't have any, it was only much later in my time there that I started being involved in and editing coverage of business and tech.
And you always knew you were going to stay in newspapers and be a journalist?
Yeah, I'm one of those really boring people who knew, like, from about age 8 that that's what I wanted to do in life. I mean, one of the wonderful things about working at the Times is meeting people who have much more interesting stories, who actually, like, went to law school, went to medical school, and then decided, I mean, like, I've worked with people, and one of my colleagues who actually has been helping us with on some reporting we've been doing lately is literally a rocket scientist. So, and then they decided that what they really wanted to do to apply their knowledge was to be journalists. So, but yeah, for me, it was always my goal was to be a journalist.
Ron Thomas says life is about detours.
Yeah.
And Marilyn's watching from sunny Staten Island. And Paula, who's a longtime producer of the show, is watching from Tallahassee. Hi, Paula. And Miriam's watching from Hell's Kitchen. And my friend Mukul Pandya, who ran knowledge at Wharton for a very long time, says, "Hello from my hospital room in Lawrence. I'm
Huh.
glad you're well enough to be watching, but why are you in the hospital? We'll talk after. Mukul, please take care of yourself." And Doug says, "Good journalists are born into it. We know early. I told my parents, Kevin, I'm sure I've told you the story. When I was 12, I wanted to be a journalist, and they started crying almost immediately. No Indian parent thinks journalism first, medicine, engineering, things like that. But some folks, of course, come much later into it, as you said, your rocket scientist colleague and others. And we should take a moment and talk about the upheaval in the media sector these last few weeks. I mean, we've had decades of trouble, but this, about 2,000 journalists have lost their jobs just in the last year, and more than 700 just this year in 1 month. And some of them are at smaller startups, including a startup that blew up $50 million
Yeah.
in a year called The Messenger.
Mhm.
But also at storied places like the Wall Street Journal, their economics section out of DC, the Economics Bureau, was kind of its own thing a little bit, and they also had a great U.S.-China team there, and all dozen people plus lost their jobs. So the Times has gone through its own layoffs and other things over your time there. So reflect on this a little bit as you look at it, and your colleagues are covering this as a business story as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, as you know, I was around, and you were there too, for the early days of the web, and specifically in my case, NYTimes.com in the mid-90s, and we didn't know where that was going or at what pace and how it would affect existing jobs and the way people would, for lack of a better term, consume the news. And it took a while to play out. And there were some shakeouts early on the digital side. In the early aughts after the .com boom, and then it was interesting. I was editing a print section about 20 years ago that was called Circuits. You wrote for it occasionally, Sri,
Yes.
about personal technology, and we, there was a little bit of attrition in print advertising, and then about 2004, it was clear that there was some canary in the coal mine that was being sensed. I mean, the early aughts were like the absolute pinnacle of print revenue, advertising and circulation, and then about 2004, it became clear. This is after, it became clear that newspapers and other print media didn't need to be an intermediary for advertisers. They could go elsewhere, whether it was Craigslist or advertising directly online and so forth. And then things, just between that moment and then 4 years later, when the financial crisis came, there was just a bottoming out of what the traditional print models had been, and it affected a lot of jobs. And yes, excuse me, I'm just going to get a quick drink of water.
Yeah, go ahead.
It affected, but our newsroom quite a bit. We had layoffs, we had buyouts, and we were, sort of treading water, trying to figure out where, how to right the ship. And then, we were fortunate in, I would say over the last 8 to 10 years, to find our way in a digital world, where really digital is the platform we think about first, although print's still very important. And so it's been difficult to watch, what's happened at some of our, some other news organizations where, many of us know people. The Journal, the Washington Post, the LA Times is having a hard time. And then these other startups that have, the Messenger is one that just like abruptly shut down and took all its content off after launching with a lot of capital seemingly behind it. So it's tough to see that. It's, the disruptions in digital media have continued. I mean, even the way people come to us on digital platforms has changed in the last few years, and we've had to think about that. I mean, how much traffic social media drives to us and in what ways, and so forth. So it's still a very disruptive time, but it's, just to get back to your initial question, very hard to see what it's doing to especially these, august news organizations, and especially ones that serve a local community, or area. I'm very partial to the LA Times because that's the part of the country I grew up in, and so it's tough not only for the journalists but for the communities that are not going to be as well served, as well covered as they have been.
Yeah, and that's really sad. Kathleen is watching from LA, and she says she appreciates the California focus in the New York Times, and that means Kathleen is up at 5:50 a.m. Thank you so much for joining us. We also have folks watching from various places. Thank you, everyone, including Sandhya is watching from Levittown on LinkedIn. So as you can see, we're on all these different platforms. And well, let's talk for about the LA Times for a moment. The LA Times, as you said, an august institution, but LA deserves highest quality reporting and coverage, and the New York Times has done a lot of California coverage and a California section and newsletters and things like that. And tell us a little bit about why that area needs the kind of journalism it deserves and what it's not getting now.
Well, it needs and deserves it because every place needs and deserves it. The print model for most, I mean, and even the digital model that we've managed to seemingly, knock on wood, it's, I never take anything for granted, but we seem to have found our way in that respect. It has been harder for others that don't have a national to develop a subscriber-based, a digital, largely phone oriented medium, if they don't have a national readership. The LA Times, as with a lot of newspapers, went through a rough period when newspaper consolidation was happening and private equity companies were coming in and so forth, and trying to milk what they could from, the sort of the legacy print product. In the case of the LA Times, and this has been true of the Washington Post as well, someone with, substantial resources came in intending to sort of steward a top-notch publication, and but the economics are daunting, and I think that's one of the things that the ownership of the LA Times found out. But I mean, I hope they will manage to find a way to keep this, the strength, because the LA Times over the years has been a remarkable newspaper. Saw have friends there, and it's also a very difficult, incredibly broad geographic region to cover. But I mean, even this weekend I've been watching, because as you've probably been reading, there's an incredible storm headed for Southern California, maybe like one of the biggest on record there. And it's going to be, I've been watching, that's where I've been watching sort of, although we've been covering it too, obviously at the Times, at the New York Times, to see how the LA Times covers that, because presumably that's going to be a medium that people turn to in a time of emergency, and where they're going to want to know what's going on.
Yeah. Tell us about your Southern California connections.
Well, I'm a sixth-generation Californian. Most of my roots in previous generations are in Northern and Central California, but I grew up in Southern California, where my parents met in high school. I went to University of Southern California, and then came to New York for graduate school for a year, which was, an amazing. In fact, my college mentors, whom you also know, Joe Saltzman, said, who had done the same sort of route, said, "Yeah, go, but don't go for Columbia, go for New York," which, when I was, 21 years old, was great, a great bit of, horizon broadening, and probably led me on a different path than I would have been on. So after that, I've never gone back to actually live in Southern California, but I visited frequently to see friends, and it still feels, I still feel very much at home there.
And then you got to spend later on in life a little bit of time in Northern California.
Right. I in the late 90s, I spent a year, really fortunate and very grateful that the Times allowed me to do this. I spent a year at Stanford on a Knight journalism fellowship, which enabled, it was right after the time I'd spent working almost 3 years on the launch of NYTimes.com and developing, other, sort of digital incarnations of and services of the New York Times, and which is how I pivoted to, the first pivot was to editing. The second really was to business and technology, because it was through that experience at the launch of the website where we had to be, journalists and business side people were thrown, and technologists were thrown in together trying to figure out what, how people would read the paper, I mean, the news online, and how we would build it and so forth. And I got exposed to a lot of, I had to collaborate on business plans. I had to, learn a lot about marketing and so forth. There's my friend Roberta, who also was at Stanford. Hello, Roberta.
Yes. And we got to teach together at Columbia. So great to see
Right.
Roberta. Pradman's
But-
watching from Mumbai.
So anyway, so
don't
that's
DC.
that was my year in California as an adult at Stanford, which was a wonderful place to be. And I spent it's a fellowship where you can spend the year just essentially having the run of the place, taking whatever courses you want. And so I focused on business, communications, and technology. And really everything I've done at the Times since then has involved either coverage of or application of technology or business coverage.
Roberta is calling you a rock star. I love that. And just a word for folks not familiar, the Stanford Fellowships, the Neiman Fellowships, the Knight Badgett Fellowships, the Michigan Knight Fellowships. There are so many very good fellowship programs for journalists wanting a sabbatical, wanting to fine-tune, retrain, etc. So if you're not aware of them, please check them out. And this is a story how one family parlayed Mexican food into a LA landmark. This year, El Cholo will mark a century as a mainstay for celebrity students and a loyal staff. And this was a story you wrote last year. Just
right. I almost never write for the paper. I wrote, and when I do, it's almost always on something, close to my heart. And so El Cholo, for those of you in LA, this is a real landmark Mexican restaurant. And last year it celebrated its 100th anniversary. It's the first restaurant I have any memory of in my life because, and like maybe once a month, my parents would take my older brother and me up from the suburb we lived in up to LA to go to this restaurant, which they discovered when my dad was going to USC on the GI Bill. And it is just, it's always been in the same family. And I was in LA on a visit, I guess, sometime a couple of years ago, and I realized that their 100th anniversary year was coming up, and I looked, and we had never in the New York Times written about this restaurant. So I pitched the story, and fortunately, the food desk at the New York Times bought in, and I interviewed the owner, who is the grandson of the founders. He's now 90. I think he just turned 91. He's been running the place since he was like right out of college. So he was already running the place when I was there as a little kid in my booster seat. And we had a wonderful talk. And one of the things that's great about El Cholo, aside from the food, is it's really a crossroads of Los Angeles where every community comes together. And I got to talk to the other reason when I do stories, they're not only.
I see Jack Nicholson.
Well, Jack Nicholson's it turns out was among the denizens of the place, and has wound up being a very close friend of Ron Salisbury, the owner. I didn't talk to Jack Nicholson, but one of the reasons I love, when I do stories is it enables me to talk to people I love to talk to. So in addition to Ron Salisbury, the owner, I talked to some some experts on food and sort of LA's sort of ethnicity. And I talked to George Raveling, who's a legendary basketball coach. For a time was at USC, and he and Ron got to know each other and be friends. So anyway, so it was a wonderful experience to be able to do this story.
Awesome.
And it is a stop of mine every time I go home to LA.
All right, and it's now on my list as well. Amy Parekh Mehta is watching from Bellevue, Washington. Neil's sister, thank you very much always for your support. We also here seeing so many folks here. Susanna is watching from Denver High. Marilyn is a Neiman Fellow here, so she understands the value of these fellowship programs. Steve's watching from LA. Hi, Steve.
Steve is an editor at the LA Times, and we were on the school paper together, the Daily Trojan at USC. So I'm glad.
Wow, that's been some time since then, and nice to see you, Steve. Sudha, Neil's mom, says, Kevin, you had a very good life and work history. Thanks for sharing it. And Roberta, very kindly, says, both Sri and Kevin have always been ahead of the curve reporting about technology. And Roberta herself on taking these technologies and using them in her work and in her storytelling. Folks, if you're just joining us, that's Kevin McKenna, Deputy Business Editor of the New York Times, and I'm Sri Srinivasan. We do the Sunday New York Times read along every Sunday, but not with Kevin. He's not been a guest here for about 5-6 years, but we're delighted that he's back. We talk about news and newspapers and journalism. We focus on the New York Times most weeks, but the reason we do it is so that we can talk about the news. Please support your local newspapers wherever they are in the world. They are so important in shedding light on so many issues. And we'll get to the paper as well as the Sunday section that Kevin will talk about in detail. But if you have any questions for Kevin, please let us know and tell us how your Sunday is going. And we do this every Sunday, so always looking for great guests. I want to do a quick preview of our next guest in advance. We want to tell you that next Sunday we have another Columbia Journalism School grad who is joining us. Ernest Scheider is going to be with us. The War Below, Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. He's a senior correspondent at Reuters, and as Kevin knows, that if it wasn't for these rare minerals, we would not be able to do all the digital stuff we are doing, including the show right now. So that's going to be a great show next Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So please join us then. I know that we've got some photos to show folks as well, including we had said that Kevin and I go on walks more. We used to do this more when I was on the Upper West Side, but he mentioned USC a couple of times, and there's Trojan Pride on his hat, and I am wearing my SAJA hat, the South Asian Journalists Association. Kevin is 30 years old now. You've supported and helped us in the past, and I decided in a moment of I don't know what to run again for the board, and was elected president, and so now I have a lot of work to do this year, and we'll be turning to you and all our friends in the media to talk about journalism. We have some other fun photos as well. When we go for walks, you can see the different weather, but there's the Trojan hat all the time, and we are just I'm just so lucky to have Kevin in my orbit. I've learned so much from Kevin, and all of you can see. Here's another time when it was really cold.
Boy, I only have one hat, it seems.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. But
I got some more since then.
Yeah, exactly. But I keep changing my hats, and before we get to the paper, I do want to spend a moment talking about the New York Times on the web and your pivotal role there. And in this book, the Times by Adam Nagorny, about how the newspaper record survived scandal and scorn and the transformation of journalism. There's a lot about what happened there, and I know you were a source and helped Adam understand and narrate the story of how the Times pivoted so successfully to digital journalism. A lot of that happened in recent years, but of course the seeds of that was in 1996 when the Times went on the web.
Right. Well, first of all, Adam's book is just brilliant. I'm so glad you had him on as a guest. He did a remarkable job of both researching and telling the story of the Times over a period of 40 years. And I was happy that I was able to contribute something from that period of when NYTimes.com was being launched. It was funny because when we were, and it's so funny to hear Roberta say, I've always been on the cutting edge of technology, because when I was thrown into that project, I was totally not on the cutting edge of technology. And I took a lot of notes, and plus things were just moving so quickly on all fronts. We had a lot to keep up with. So I took a lot of notes. I saved a lot of, documentation from, especially the first year we thought we were going to launch the website. There was a group of 4 of us, 2 from the newsroom, 1 from the advertising, and 1 from technology. And we, everything was moving so fast. This is the beginning of '95, and everybody was, there was this land rush onto the World Wide Web, and we thought we were going to get a website up in 6 weeks, which was totally unrealistic, but also fortunate that it didn't happen, because to do it well, it took a lot more time. It took a year to get launched. And so I had squirreled away a lot of this material. The joke was, at the time, was always that Kevin was going to write the book, which, I thought that period itself, I didn't know what the book was going to be, but as part of the long narrative of sort of arc of the Times that Adam lays out, I was just really pleased to see that episode, that sort of phase of our development reflected. It was, and I was pleased to be able to contribute. I think he captured it very well. And one of the things that was so fun about that time was we were a little bit, outside the box, in the, both literally, we weren't even in the same building as the rest of the paper, but we were also, it was one of those things where you could experiment, you could figure out what works and what didn't, and often didn't sort of have to ask permission. And so it was really wonderful, not only for our ability to figure out what did work at that point in time, which is obviously a point of very low bandwidth, with people on dial-up modems, and very desktop oriented. And we were trying to figure out, will people use this in addition to the paper, instead of the paper? And that's obviously continued to evolve over the years. But it was really instructive, and really a luxury almost, to have the space we did to try to experiment and build a staff, figure out how we needed to do this, and so forth.
We have a photograph that we want to show you. This is from your collection, and tell us what this moment is. It's a pivotal
So this
moment.
is the moment of our launch. It was actually sort of, I guess what you would call it, the soft launch, because I think our official launch was on a Monday morning in January of 1996. So this is the Friday night preceding, when we actually pushed the button to go live. And the fellow you see on the far left, hunched over the cathode ray tube, the big monitor there, as they were in those days, is Ben Grabowski, who was on our tech team. And that's me in the white shirt and tie next to him, back in the days when we wore ties in the newsroom, even at midnight, apparently, because that's when this was. And it was just I'm looking at all those colleagues and just remembering what an amazing time that was.
Kevin, as I look at that picture, obviously I'm struck by how few women, and I see at least one person of color there. Today, the Times is very different, isn't it?
Very different. Although I have to say, in that, there were quite a few women in that. Probably not nearly enough, but quite a few women in our operation as we were building the organization. I mean, and some of the people went on to we hired an awful lot of people who were right out of college, and one of the reasons was not just that they were young, but it was that, like, we needed people who knew HTML coding and who knew the web, and that's where people knew the web in 1995 was in colleges. They were already like building websites, and they were already on the web, and so they could bring those skills into the newsroom. And that's one of the things that was really remarkable and enjoyable about that period and that operation was that there was an awful lot of sort of young blood, as it were, to inform it. Some of whom have gone on to careers in digital media. Meredith Artley, whom I'm sure wound up running the online operation at CNN. But you're right. Since part of the story that Adam lays out, not about the online operation per se, but the Times as a whole, is what a much more diverse place it has become. And actually, it's sort of striking, as you go back 30 plus years to see how much, it's just sort of striking how white and male it was at the time.
Carl Levin says he sees Bernie Gortzman.
Yep.
And Tom, I'm not sure which Tom.
Tom Botkin, I imagine he's referring to in there somewhere watching.
And Ron Thomas points out that it was funny that you mentioned the ties.
Yeah.
So today, if you walked around the Times, the tie percentage is very tiny, I presume.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm wearing right now is about as dressy as it gets. Very rare, to see people wearing ties. Occasionally, if there's we're having a visitor in, that where we're having a sit-down meeting, then people, then the guys will put jacket and tie on. But it's that I would say, sort of in the course of the aughts, what used to be called business casual became about as dressy as it got.
Yeah. Before we go into the paper, I know there were a couple of stories that you wanted to talk about, and we're showing them here in the digital format. So let's talk through them, and then we'll go to the paper, folks.
Okay.
That's Kevin McKenna, Deputy Business Editor of the New York Times. I'm Sri Srinivasan. This is the New York Times Read Along. Thank you so much for joining us. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, digimentors.group website, and for only the third time, we're on Instagram. Many of you have asked for that. Thank you for joining us there as well. Please hit share on any of these platforms or tag your friend on any of these platforms. They'll be able to watch now or instantly. The show will start on those platforms after restart on those platforms. So please join us, and join us every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. So over to you, Kevin.
So I was invited to share some work I've been involved in recently as an editor. And so I picked some stories that I think have a connecting thread. They're all wonderful stories. And first of all, in almost every case, they were the reporter's idea. And I think reporters' ideas are almost always the best ideas. But they also show, as I mentioned, I'm my group is of reporters focuses on the economy, autos, energy, and retail. But those latter three all have an economic dimension. And part of the challenge is with economic stories is making them sort of humanizing them and taking and making them visual and taking sort of wonky ideas and making them very readable. So this is the first example. This is by Jordan Holman, who's a remarkable retail reporter for us. And she went to the Carolinas. I mentioned that my first job out of journalism school was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And that was at a period when the textile industry down there was still going strong. And it has since, as I think is widely known, it has since largely moved overseas. There's still a vestige of it, and largely catering to the military, which has a certain requirement for domestic made goods, and also to some other retailers who want to sell U.S. made goods. So this is what this story is about, in addition to showing the both the cotton that's being grown down there and the factories in which it's being turned into clothing, it is a story about a threat that these folks see, and from a trade provision that's known as de minimis, which some of you, without even knowing the term, may have benefited from, which means that goods under a certain price, it's risen to, I think, $800, can be shipped directly into the country without customs fees. And both the textile manufacturers and retailers, for that matter, see that as yet another threat to their ability to compete. So that's what Jordan laid out in this piece, and it's just there's great characters. She went down. She spent a fair amount of time in North and South Carolina, and it's very well told.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a great story. I think let's do one or two more. Let's see the next one.
So this is a piece by an economics reporter, Talman Smith, who again found, was on the trail of something. This is one where it certainly has characters, but it's also illuminated by charts. And this is a way of taking, again, something that's sort of quantitative and making it tangible. This is about the wealth transfer. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight, but that's from the baby boomers, essentially, now to the next generation. And it's sort of the biggest prospective transfer of wealth from one generation to another, ever. But, one of the things that this piece looks at is how, because, the wealth inequality in America, which has become quite pronounced, especially since houses came to be something that you've looked at as an investment and not just as a place to live in, how that inequality is going to be compounded as the wealth is handed down from generation to generation, and how things like the current tax code serve to intensify that fact. So this was a great piece that was told both through characters and through charts, and just really and some and a very good read.
Excellent. I remember reading that story. Learned a lot. All right, let's do one more.
So this is a piece by our Western economics correspondent, Curtis Lee, who's based in Los Angeles. This is a piece about, it's done from West Hollywood, California. When I was growing up, that was unincorporated territory, but it's long since become a city. And it's now the city in the United States with the highest minimum wage. What Curtis set out to do, and through the businesses and workers in West Hollywood, was to test, like what this means when you're in an enclave. In West Hollywood, I think is entirely surrounded by the city of Los Angeles, which has a lower minimum wage. What that means to businesses, what it means to workers, it's a theory that's been tested by economists before on the ground in various places when there are places side by side with different minimum wages. But again, as I say, it was sort of a little bit of an academic concept, but this is how it plays out on the ground. And it's, it talked about some of the restaurants there, what they've had to, how they've dealt with this, and whether they, in some cases feel it's better just to move out of the city and do business somewhere nearby. At the same time, it talks about the workers who've obviously benefited from this. So, and it's something, as minimum wages are rising, and as there's a continuing push at the federal level to increase the minimum wage, it was just, I think, a very instructive piece.
All right, and then we have one more story.
All right, so this is a piece by Noam Scheiber, who's covers labor for us. He's based in Chicago. He was very early to cover the rise of the union movement at Starbucks. And then we've seen it also at places like Trader Joe's, REI, the Apple Store, and so forth. And one of the things that he saw was a connecting thread was that a lot of this, and this is a time when, until like 4 years ago, the received wisdom for decades had been that like unions were on the decline, and suddenly there's this surge of union activity in these consumer-facing businesses. And the connecting thread was that not only it was being organized by, and the workforce was remarkably, populated by college graduates. And so Noam identified this, sort of as a thing, as a trend to write about. And he did a really interesting article. Spoiler alert, he's now turning it into a book about, how it is that, that college graduates have found, that after getting out of college, that, working at Starbucks or the Apple Store for, not much more than the minimum wage is what it's come to. And so both what that says about the economic opportunities for college graduates and the backstory of why those the people who are organizing in these places tend to be college graduates themselves and bring that experience to their union cause.
Well, some great stories there. Thank you so much, folks. That's Kevin McKenna, Deputy Business Editor of the New York Times. We have about 40 minutes with Kevin. We read the paper together 8:30 to 10 a.m. on Sundays with great guests like Kevin. And thank you all who have joined us. And we're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and now Instagram as well. And if you want to see our archive going back many years, you can go to digimentors.group and look for the New York Times Read Along section and check us out. We've been doing this actually for 8 years plus, and Kevin was an early supporter and early guest that made that possible. We have lots of comments and questions coming in as well. I'm just going to ask you a question, Neil, from Mukul Pandya, who used to be at Knowledge at Wharton and is in his hospital bed in New Jersey, but obviously well enough to be with us. He says, Kevin, thank you for sharing your insights. How is AI changing business and tech journalism at the paper?
Well, it's, in at least two respects. One is our coverage of AI, and how which is also to some extent an economic story as well as a tech story, and what it's going to mean for. In fact, one of the stories that we'll see on the cover of the Sunday Business section this week is about, how one of the new corporate titles is, Chief AI Officer. So part of it is, on that side of it is how we're covering the rise of AI and trying to figure out what its utility and its disruption will be. But as far as the way we use it, we're still that's is still something we're trying to figure out. The Times itself has named an AI officer in the newsroom to figure out ways to put that to use AI to advantage. As you probably read, the Times has filed a lawsuit against Microsoft and OpenAI over the ways in which chatbots can, sort of verbatim return the text of Times content in this case, in a way that doesn't require people to go to the source material, or may even, in fact, produce misleading information that attributed to a named source. So all of those, I guess that's all by way of saying it's early days. We don't know how any of this is going to play out, but we're trying to, but it's obviously here, it's happening. It's, and it's, when I was talking about, a few months ago, I had an opportunity to answer a few questions at a Times gathering after Adam's book came out, and was asked to describe the moment in 95, 96 when we were starting the website. And I said, it was like, and I said, it reminded me of what happened in the last 12 or 15 months with AI. I mean, it's just all happening so fast, and we're all trying to figure it out. Thank you for your question. I wish I had a more definitive answer, except that stay tuned is definitely something we're very focused on.
Your observation is absolutely right. I've been telling folks that it's really like three different tech revolutions, right? The internet generally, and the web, and then social media, and now AI. And that's been kind of fascinating to track. And I'm just going to put up the card from my AI workshop to remind everyone that I've been teaching a new non-scary guide to AI workshop at newsrooms and elsewhere, and both online and in person. So if you'd like to talk about this, just email me, sri@digimentors.group. We make them customizable so that anyone can benefit from the workshop. So please let me know. And as you can see, I've been teaching web journalism for a long time. I used to have hair, and the computers look different, just as they did in the computer that Kevin was showing in 1996. Well, let's see who else is here. Leanne Chung is watching from Sarasota, Florida, editor-in-chief of Columbia Engineering Student Newspaper years ago. That's terrific. And one more question before we get to the paper. Who is your most memorable mentor in your career?
Well, I would say there were two, and both of them, unfortunately, have just recently passed away within the last year and a half or so. One, in fact, was just a month ago, and that was Joe Lelyveld, who was ultimately the executive editor of the Times. And he was, when we first got to know each other, it was in my early days on the foreign desk, and when he became foreign editor, I became assistant foreign editor under, working with him. And he had a remarkable impact on my. I learned so much from him, and then he was, opened a lot of doors after that to me at the Times. So that broadened my my experience. And the other is Al Siegel, who was an assistant managing editor ultimately at the Times, remarkable editor, an incredible presence in that newsroom for decades. And he was the one who hired me when I came to the Times, and we remained close thereafter. So those would be my two answers.
And I got to know Joe Lelyveld, especially because of his connection to India. He had been a reporter
Right.
There, an editor, reporter there, correspondent there. And Al Siegel, I met through you. Kevin was very kind enough to hire me for a kind of professor's internship when I was a professor at Columbia Journalism School in 1997. He brought me in, and we worked on a project together, and I got to meet Al Siegel, go to multiple A1 meetings at the time. That was a lot of fun, and there's a picture of Al Siegel as well, and Neil put up the Joe Lelyveld obit as well. So let's get to the paper. We have about 30 minutes left with Kevin. We have to browse through lots of sections in the paper, so this is going to be fun. Let's take a look, and Kevin will jump in on any thoughts he has as I look through the paper. So jump in at any point, especially if you want to do a shout out or explain some background or something that lay readers won't know. The lead story, U.S. and U.K. carry out blitz among Houthis, second day of reprisal, large-scale airstrikes, Iran-backed rebels in Yemen's north. And the lead photograph here is, after 500 years, Mexican bullfighting faces a mortal challenge, ethical and legal battles over animal rights. So this is a fascinating story. China builds up nuclear arsenal. Xi's fear and ambition shape his strategy. And as views shift on substance use, so does the meaning of sober. And grieving her husband's overdose death, Tiffany Fade began using magic mushrooms, and her view on full abstinence changed. And Curb spun gold out of gripes and grievances. This is, I guess, the final season of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Are you a watcher, Kevin?
I am not. I know of the show, but I've never been a watcher of it.
All right. And here's an unusual story. Outcry over a cat. The Kremlin will allow it. A cat named Twix was found dead after being mistakenly thrown from a long distance train by an attendant. And it has highlighted both the limits and the demand for an emotional outlet in wartime Russia. Fascinating story that I want to dive deep on. As you know, in the in Russia, things are very much controlled. So even this has to be sanctioned to be a story. We had one of the editors of page A2 and A3 talk to us at a previous read along. And this is one of the many ways, of course, that print paper has changed. And so many little things here, including the headline from history that's been there for a long time. This one's from 1897. Cat gives alarm of fire. Another cat story. And a stray cat was credited with saving the lives of 20 people at an apartment building in Manhattan after a tenant of the fire alerting a tenant of the about the fire. That's interesting. And here to help, 4 films to stream before they leave Netflix in February: Prometheus, Operation Finale, Dune, and Legends of the Fall. This is an old movie, 1994. Loved that film when it came out. And any thoughts about this presentation or?
A2 and A3, I think, are just wonderful. It's one of the, I have to say that for all we've said about the emphasis on digital, the Times does a lot to make the print paper rewarding for readers who are still, a substantial part of both our readership and our revenue. And A2 and A3 were redesigned a few years back with a magazine sensibility. It's like the front of the book in a magazine. And it's, those pages are great because there's so many little gems and little, that you just sort of, hover over and I think this is delightful.
Here's the international section. Lights, Camera, Modi. It's a one-man show on Indian television. Folks may not understand how much there is of Indian news just in English. There'd be a couple of dozen English news 24-hour channels. And then in dozens of regional languages, maybe 100 plus other 24-hour news site channels. So that's something that's very different than our 3-4 channels here in the US. In Egypt, proposal to resurface a pyramid in granite draws heated debate. And let's see here. Nationalist leader's appointment marks new era for Northern Ireland. And I know you're proud of your Irish connection, so tell us about this story.
Well, this is a fascinating turn of events. I was reading this story, and you and I both have Irish connections here in New York. I know John Lee is watching, but through the Irish business group here in New York. But I have spent some time in Ireland. I've actually, years ago, wrote some stories from Ireland and followed its from a distance, its evolution from the times of the Troubles in Northern Ireland until today. And this is what this piece says is, for the first time, the first minister, first of all, the government in Northern Ireland had sort of fallen apart again for the last 2 years because of an impasse between the unionist and nationalist communities. And now they reached an agreement to come back together. And for the first time, the leader of the first minister is not only, a nationalist from a Catholic tradition, but a member of Sinn Féin, which was, the political arm of the Irish Republican Army. It's it's a party, by the way, that's also gaining strength in the Republic of Ireland. So this moment of the first minister, I think her name is Michelle O'Neill, on the staircase there at Stormont, the assembly in Belfast, is really remarkable.
Thank you, and a shout out to our Irish friends. I'm not Irish, as folks will guess, but we have a lot of Irish friends here in New York City, including John Lee, who you mentioned, and the Irish Business Organization. We don't normally look at the ads, but sometimes we do, and this is interesting. It's time to take back the internet. Forget the noise. Let's build the internet we want, not the one we inherited. And it's called readwriteown.com, and it's from Random House and A16Z, which is Andreessen Horowitz, the big VC company. So yeah, I'm not sure. It must be a book that they've written, and I want to see more. But of course, Mark Andreessen and Andreessen Horowitz are responsible for a lot of what we see on the internet today because of the
Right.
companies that they've backed and supported and been very, very successful with. As U.S. acts, Biden deems Iran unlikely to shoot back. And Missing Girl, Her Rescuers, and Urgency for Answers. And this is Missing Girl in Gaza. Let's see how crisis at UN's top aid agency in Gaza pushed it to the point of collapse. That we've seen that as a big story. And here's an ad for the U.S. Australian Association. And look at these pictures of bullfighting in Mexico. I associate bullfighting with Spain, but obviously it's a huge deal in Mexico as well. And Turkey's bank chief abruptly steps down. Senior officials said a departure did not signal a policy shift. More stories here. Wildfires threatening 2 Chilean cities destroy 1,000 homes and kill 46. Witnesses to the execution that was like no other. And I'm sure you followed this, the story about nitrogen gas being used to kill, to execute a prisoner because they couldn't find in a previous attempt get the right veins for him to kill him with lethal injection. Dignified transfer, the solemn homecoming of the 3 killed in Jordan. And there's a whole story here, as we said, about Curb Your Enthusiasm, the Larry David show. And lots of ads here. Smithsonian student travel. Let's see. North Carolina, Biden secures primary victory. And Harris leads Biden's efforts to shore up black vote. And with Santos' seat at stake, Republican Israeli veterans court Jewish voters. And that is, of course, some irony in there, because one of the things that he got in trouble for was pretending to be Jewish himself. We're coming up here. Remains of 19 black people used in racist study are entombed. A museum is facing criticism for a process that some have called rushed and opaque. And this is at the Penn Museum. And Biden to sit out interview before Super Bowl again. And House GOP plans vote on standalone aid for Israel. Now here we'll come to the obituary section. And I know you also read the obituaries. We had Amy Padnani on our show from the Bit Desk, and an editor there who created Overlooked, the series about people of color and women who had been ignored by the New York Times, overlooked in its obituaries. Joe Madison, 74, dies, popular radio host who fought injustice. He blended on-air activism, social activism with advocacy outside the studio. Tony Stern, a California poet who provided the words to songs on Tapestry. Tapestry, of course, is the huge Carole King album.
I read that obit this morning. I didn't know Tony Stern's name or her role, but I was fascinated. But I certainly remember when, Carole King's album was, I was in high school, was like, it was a huge hit, and I didn't, so it was fascinating to read about her role in that. And then she was part of the sort of the Laurel Canyon crowd in Los Angeles. And then after her, brief songwriting collaboration, went back to poetry, and apparently is a fairly, noted, was a fairly noted poet.
Awesome. Anne Edwards, 96, the best-selling queen of biography. She profiled Maria Callas, Judy Garland, and Ronald Reagan. And Carl Weathers died. The actor who played Apollo Creed in Rocky is dead at 76. Someone said there is no Rocky Balboa without Apollo Creed. And he had late life success again in the Mandalorian series in the Star Wars universe. And sports, 2 decades later, a revival of The Greatest Show on Turf. So a lot about the Super Bowl coming up. Are you going to be watching?
I'll be keeping track.
Okay. And of course, there's a lot more interest this year because of the appearance of Taylor Swift. And
can I jump in on that real quick, if you don't mind?
Please.
On the issue of Taylor Swift, the criticism, this is something that I've seen across social media, coming across my feeds. All of this commentary, this criticism of the focus on Taylor Swift and why is she getting so much attention? She's supporting her boyfriend, etc. The best pieces that I've seen online are the reminders that your daughters are watching and your daughters are listening to the criticism. that, as a proud father of a Swiftie, as a Swiftie dad, the all we saw the picture of Jack Nicholson earlier, right? How many times was he seen at a Lakers game, for example, or Spike Lee and others? So I just wanted to make that point and make sure that folks understand it's. I think the criticism is absolutely ridiculous out there.
And also someone, I think in the Times, went through and showed us that it was like 44 seconds in a 3 hour sportscast. Another one, it was just 35 seconds over multiple appearances. So this is not taking away from the game. And you're absolutely right about Spike Lee, Jack Nicholson, and others when they appear at any other sport.
And Diana,
You're a Yankee fan. You know that when the mayors of New York over the years show up at Yankee games, they show them multiple times. I remember seeing Giuliani, Bloomberg, de Blasio. It's just a routine thing that they do on those sportscasts.
well, not just that. When they do the premier games of playoffs or a World Series, All Star Game, whichever network is hosting the game, they flood their stars for their shows, and they do cutaways. And oh, so and so, who's starring in this show Tuesdays at 8 o'clock. I mean, they use that. Taylor Swift is not asking for this by any means. The networks are doing it. Diana has a good point. It's not just the daughters who are listening, sons as well. So I wanted to make sure we heard that.
And you're seeing three three dads of girls on the show. I do have a son as well, but two of you have daughters only.
Absolutely.
And,
Thanks.
yeah, thanks, Neil. Okay, so here's the Sunday business section. We're talking to Kevin McKenna, who is the deputy business editor at the paper. So I want him to kind of talk us through not just what we're seeing here, but also maybe some of the changes over time in the business section. And please feel free to ask questions of Kevin. We have about 20 minutes with Kevin.
Yeah. So one of the changes, which maybe this lead article here represents, is that our tech has become a huge part of our coverage. I mean, when you may recall, Sri, when we started NYTimes.com, one of the things, and this is one of the ways in which we had a little bit of, I was saying we were a little bit, don't ask permission, ask forgiveness. We felt there wasn't enough tech coverage in the Times for the then very tech, oriented, web audience. So we commissioned extra content, for the website on technology. That is, that's sort of no longer the case. We have I was tech editor at two different stages in the late 90s and in the early aughts. And since then, our tech, staff has become even bigger and mostly based in the Bay Area, although also in New York and overseas. This piece I wanted to talk about because so it's about crypto, but I want to talk first about the reporter, who's really remarkable. He came to us as a fellow, a Times fellow, spending a 1 year with us on the business desk, I think right before leading into the pandemic. We're very impressive, precocious talent, David Yaffe-Bellany. He left briefly, but we got him back, and he was hired back to cover crypto, just as before anybody knew that crypto was going to be the biggest thing, I think. And this is a great thing about a good, a great reporter. You put them on any beat, and they'll immediately figure it out. And David did, and he did some of the most amazing work on Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and everything that happened with the rise and fall of a lot of, some of the crypto platforms. So this piece today, I never heard of this person before, but it's really a remarkable piece about a crypto influencer named Ben Armstrong, who, as you read, I think the little blurb there before, Ben Armstrong has lost his life. His wife, his followers, and his Lamborghini. I just wanted, and the thing about David, and I was making this point about coverage too, is like, it's about explaining sometimes these concepts, but it's also about people and characters. And this, I just want to read two two passages from this piece because David it tells it so well. At first, it says, BitBoy was one of the most popular figures in the wild scam-ridden world of crypto influencers. Cultivating a persona as a straight-talking everyman, he filmed a live stream 5 days a week in which he lectured his hundreds of thousands of listeners on the virtues of experimental coins with names like Polkadot or XRP. He said that regulators were fools and that digital money offered a path to upward mobility. The Lamborghini was vivid proof. Crypto would make you rich and cool and successful. 2 years later, Mr. Armstrong, 41, has lost his production company and much of his wealth. His friends have turned on him, and his wife has filed for divorce. Over the past 5 months, across countless social media posts and videos, Mr. Armstrong has claimed to be the victim of a, quote, criminal conspiracy by, quote, terrorists who took over his YouTube channel. BitBoy, that was his name online, is dead, he recently declared. And then David goes on to write, if crypto is the Wild West of finance, then crypto influencers inhabit the wildest stretch of that frontier. The top YouTubers, veering between earnest soliloquies about the Federal Reserve's rate cuts and impassioned endorsements of coins named after cartoon animals, command huge audiences and hold sway over the types of obsessively online day traders who drive the so-called meme stock frenzy in 2021. Competition for viewership is fierce. The result is something like a cross between professional wrestling and CNBC, a loose community of self-promoters feuding over who offers the best financial advice. I think it's a wonderful story. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, so everyone should check that out. And so tell us about, we'll go through the paper. I just want to show this story, the hottest job in corporate America, Chief AI Officer. And our friend David Matheson hosted the world's first Chief AI Officer Conference, which was in December in Boston at Northeastern University as part of cdosummit.com. And everyone should definitely check that out so that you can learn about his upcoming conference in DC, and a lot of interesting things happening in the AI world. And I was lucky to be the MC for that day in Boston of the CDO Summit. So definitely check out CDO Summit and cdoclub.com. So this story is about creating executive roles to navigate and harness a disruptive technology. And this sounds to me, Kevin, like the days when the chief digital officer was a major role. I always said the transitional
the writer
role.
Yiwen Lu, who's a fellow this year in our San Francisco bureau, mentions that these titles have come as as new sort of disruptive things arise. That companies have had that they have given rise to new titles and new opportunities to sort of figure out how corporations can harness these technologies.
And I always said that CDO, the title was transitionary because the chief digital officer would be the CEO because they would have grown up in the digital world. Right. And same thing with AI. So maybe you can walk us through these different sections here or different features. Here's the work friend by Roxanne Gay, and then you have the strategies by Jeff Summer.
And that's coming off of the Fed meeting this week and how investors should put it in perspective.
And then the retiring column.
I don't have the section in front of me, so I forget what it's about this week, but it's a very
what Medicare may mean changes.
Medicare, right.
Savings on drugs. And then you still have classified ads here. And,
we do.
And jobs posted.
Still a few. But nothing like it used to be in terms of the volume of ads. But still, yeah, it's sort of a remarkable, by standards of today, still a remarkable volume of classifieds.
And so these also run online in the Times, I presume.
That's a good question. I don't think they do, but I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. And then here's an ad from Snapchat. As I mentioned earlier, we did an in-depth look at the problems of social media last week with Jeff Horowitz from the Wall Street Journal. And here, Snapchat is saying we're less social media, more Snapchat, and more Snapchat.com. And they want to focus themselves as being less social media and more direct communication with each other, between folks, is what you're seeing here. So that's an interesting take. Let's keep going. We have about 10 minutes. The Sunday Styles section. I know you were interested in this particular story, Williamsburg.
Right. I confess I haven't even opened the style section yet to see how this was presented in print, but I came to it on my phone, and I've only caught up with it yesterday. This is an amazing. I'm sure it's amazing in print as well. Remarkable piece of documentation, combination of visual history, oral history of how Williamsburg, Brooklyn, over the last 35 years or so, has been transformed into a fairly down on the heels industrial neighborhood whose populations were mainly Orthodox Jewish and Puerto Rican, into the ultimate sort of in gentrification. And it's really, whatever platform you read this on, or whether you read it in print, it's really worth looking at. It's a remarkable, not just because of what it says about Williamsburg, but what it says about the ways in which economic change and housing prices and so forth have changed neighborhoods and changed and obviously whenever there's the people moving in and you see like there's now huge apartment buildings, there were zoning changes, there are now fancy boutiques. I've not spent much time in Williamsburg in my days, but it really is quite remarkable to go out there.
And we know we have a lot of former New Yorkers and New York fans watching, so they will enjoy watching this. One of the things you said to me was that a lot of your stories now start digital first and then in that mobile first. So talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah. So, and this happens in some of our stories for the business section. It's routine that if something that's heavily designed, interactive based. Most recently we worked with the graphics desk on something, or one of the things, since my group includes transportation coverage, is we've been following what's going on at Boeing and trying to get to the bottom of this incident that happened a month ago, where the side panel just blew off on a 737 MAX, and they did an amazing interactive for which they did really incredible reporting and research. And that was all of it is conceived with digital presentation, and especially the idea that, how are people going to come to this on the phone, first of all, because our readership, when in the early days of all this, of NYTimes.com, we were strictly designing for the desktop, but now it's phone first, and then that's because of the way it sort of reformats itself for the desktop, sometimes with not quite as much interaction. But then when all that is said and done, then designers will determine, like, how do we present this in print, and that's so it's really both in terms of, I think, our content, certainly the timing of when we publish things, and how we design for them. It's digital is always the first consideration.
Fascinating. We don't have a lot of time left, so we're just going to quickly look at the cover of the New York Times Magazine. The long shadow of 1948, how the decisions that led to the founding of Israel left the region in a state of eternal conflict. For history buffs and people who don't know enough history should definitely be looking at that. The cover of the Sunday Opinion is about the Democratic Party having an identity crisis. And the Metropolitan cover, I know you were interested in this story.
Yes. So I have to admit, I don't know where I was a year ago when Flacco was in the news, because I must have been very bad. I don't remember following it. But this is the first anniversary of somebody cutting a hole in the enclosure where this owl was kept at the Central Park Zoo, and the owl's now been out for a year. And this piece by Ed Shanahan, who's a wonderful colleague. We were editors together on the business desk for a while. Now he's a reporter writer on the Metropolitan desk. This is an amazing story, trying to trace the life of this elusive owl who's been out and about for a year, largely apparently on the Upper West Side streets. So we may have a sighting up here, but it's just so both. I mean, it's both wonderfully reported, but very playfully told. Ed. Not only so one of the things is there's no one for there's no other owl of this breed for Flacco to breed with, looking for a mate. So Ed called Ruth Westheimer to find out like some advice on for Flacco and his love life, and then among the other, just not to the spoiler alert here. One of the people Ed also called for comment or reached out to for comment is Big Bird. So Big Bird is also quoted in the article. It's just a wonderful piece. And then the other thing is underneath it, if you'll see here, there's a sidebar by Mishi Kakutani, who's been, a critic for, the Times for years. And just putting the tale of Flacco, the on the loose into pop cultural perspective, on comparing it to everything, like says Flacco's jailbreak and new life on the lam cast him in the role of outlaw, a beloved figure in American movies from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid to The Fugitive to The Shawshank Redemption. And she goes on to talk about Johnny Cash, and it's just like an amazing little riff. So I highly recommend that.
I think Jonathan Borstein wins our comment of the day. He says clearly the article is a hoot. Thank you, Jonathan, on the watching from downtown New York. Thanks very much, folks. We are almost out of time. We're going to give Kevin a 1 minute, 2 minute break to catch his breath, and then come back and leave us with some final thoughts about journalism today and being an editor or anything else he'd like to talk about. But I'm going to have Neil come back on. We're going to take Kevin off camera, have Neil come back on and tell us about what's coming up. Neil, great show. Kevin was fantastic. And I'm excited that we were able to do this. Folks can watch this obviously on all these platforms right away, and join us every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern.
Absolutely. This was a great show to produce. It was great to see you two back together again. I've actually, I've been working with you for a long time, Sri, but I hadn't met Kevin before, and he had been on the show before I started working with you. So he loomed large in my imagination, and he did not disappoint. And it was great to see the range of articles we were able to talk about, the work that he's overseeing, but then also taking a close look at the business section and the Flacco article in particular. What I thought was really interesting is that, in one case, the Williamsburg story, Kevin was saying, you got to look at it online. It's just incredible. And it's in fact, it's apparently better on mobile than on desktop, is what he was saying. But then with Flacco, he actually went the other way, and he said he saw that in print. I was showing the online version because I also like sometimes showing that parallel. But he was like, I would really love the print version of that. So really, it was really great to see both things.
Patty
As Sri
says, thank you
go ahead.
for the production team for another awesome episode. It's only awesome because of our audience and our great guests. We're always looking for great guests. So please let us know if you would like to be on the show or nominate someone who you'd like to be on the show. Speaking of guests, let's tell them about next week.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, Ernest Schreider is going to be our guest. He's actually a Reuters correspondent. He is the author of The War Below, Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. So we're looking forward to having him on next week. As a reminder, the show is sponsored by Muckrack, a longtime supporter of Sri's projects and events, and a longtime supporter of the New York Times Read Along. I want to thank Muckrack for their support. And I want to give a special shout out, Sri, to Mike Schneider, because yesterday I reached out to him Sunday. It was Sunday evening. One of our regular viewers, or former guest, Alex Tarquinio, had trouble with her Muckrack profile. And I did an email. Within 45 minutes, Mike had responded and put us in touch with someone to kind of sort things out. So thank you to Mike for that.
The Muckrack folks are wonderful. So thank you.
Absolutely. The show is, of course, produced by Digimentors, which is the consulting firm that Sri had set up several years ago that I joined almost 4 years ago now in July. So it was about 3.5 years. And if we can help you with an event with social amplification, the AI workshops that Sri mentioned, please please make sure to get in touch. Um, Sri mentioned the show that I'm going to be starting, which is also produced by Digimentors, on starting on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a new show co-hosted with my friend Don Helmrich, Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. It's something that we've talked about on this show a few times. We've had some guests who have shared their experiences. If you remember the New York Times restaurant critic who had been
Brian,
at the
yeah.
top, Brian, at the top of his game, and everything, he had to walk away because his depression was too overwhelming. So I'm going to be sharing my own experiences with anxiety and depression. This is the first time I'm saying those words out loud, Sri, in a public space. I actually don't talk about that. I do see a therapist weekly. I've been challenged with anxiety and depression. Going back to high school. I can remember individual times. I'm hoping that by talking about it, we can help remove the stigma around mental health.
You
So
absolutely will be helping so many people. So, folks, please find them on the Digimentors channels as well as Neil's channels. We've got lots of great comments coming in.
thank
We're
you.
going to bring Kevin McKenna back in just a moment. Ron Thomas says, I always check my time zones in my travels for Sundays, depending upon where he's located. He's based in Dubai, but travels all over. Thank you so much, Ron. And Diana says, thank you for a great show. I learned so much from Kevin. Raja is watching and says, thank you, Sri and Neil. Jonathan says, great show. Thank you. Mukul says, great discussion. Thank you so much, Kevin, Sri, and Neil. And let's bring Kevin back. All this praise that we're getting, Kevin, really belongs to you. And Mukul, as we said, is watching from his hospital bed. So I'm a little worried about that. And Diana says to Neil, thank you for sharing your story. And Dan Foreman, our good friend and colleague, says, excellent idea for the show focused on mental health, much needed. And Ron says, always a master class. So with that, I'm going to ask Kevin to share some final thoughts.
Yeah, you were asking about sort of print and the future. Neil mentioned that some of these pieces I'd read first online, on the phone, and some in print. I actually, read both, and depending on like what time is available to me and when I'm catching up with things and so forth. So, and as I mentioned, print is still has a very loyal readership, although it's declining slowly. It's still very important to us. I think the biggest threat I've seen to print. I know you had Mike Connors, who oversees our printing operation in Queens, on the show a few years back. My observation is the biggest threat we have in print right now is not having enough presses around the country to print the paper on. Our Southern California press run is now printed in Las Vegas because there's no place to print in Southern California. So many presses have closed down. So that's one of the threats to print in the future. But just to wrap up, I mean, I've been so wonderfully fortunate in my career, and I've learned so much from you, Sri, in terms of technology, and had wonderful opportunities. And I just want to also mention that one of the other things I do, we didn't talk about, is I teach a class at Baruch College to undergraduates in the spring, an editing class that's about applying editing skills to the digital age. And one of the things that I'm really encouraged about is that a lot of the students I've taught have some of them have gone into journalism. They're at places like Politico, the Wall Street Journal, crypto publications, and so forth. It's great to see that another generation is carrying the torch, and applying these same kinds of skills and values to the new medium. So I'm very encouraged about that.
Sri, you're muted. We need to get
Sorry.
your mic back on.
Sorry about that. A couple of questions we didn't get to, but I'm just going to throw them out there. Maybe you can just wrap them in a final thought. Kevin's point at the start about the rough economics in news and Noam's focus on new unionizing suggests that there might be a movement to accelerate unionizing within news organizations. How would you go about exploring that as a story idea? Asked Carl. And John says, how has digital changed international impact and status of the New York Times? So though you could talk about these for a long time, but let's get some wrap-up thoughts on those.
Well, to Carl's questions, there've been, we have done a number of stories. There have been a lot of, especially in some of the digital first newsrooms, and even in some legacy newsrooms, there's been a big increase in unionization and union activity. There was just a walkout at Forbes for a few days over a contract impasse. So we're definitely seeing a lot of ferment in the media industry, and I think part of it is a reflection of the disruptive time we're living through. As far as what was the second question again? I'm sorry.
About the impact of digital.
Oh, the international impact. Yeah, well, that's a subject close to my heart because I spent the first part of my career overseas. It's a huge. Even when we were starting NYTimes.com, we knew that gave us much more reach than we'd had, and it's sort of an immediacy, and it has become. It's definitely a growth opportunity for us. I think the learning we've taken away in recent years is that readers in other places, be they English language countries or otherwise, are not coming to us because they want us to be local, to provide local coverage of their area. We're there to explain that area to the world, but they're coming to us to understand, probably to understand the United States better and its, politics and culture, but also to have there really aren't that many news organizations left that cover the world in a big way, and especially in war zones where it's very expensive and very dangerous to operate. So I think there's a big it really does increase our reach quite a bit to have the international presence. We've got big newsrooms in both news operations, not just bureaus, but newsrooms in both Seoul for Asia and in London. And that's what enables us to be really a 24/7 operation. The production of the homepage and so forth, and a lot of the editing sort of circles the globe in the course of a 24-hour day. So we very much think of ourselves as sort of having an international presence.
And very much so. And I will say, last thought from my side is that Bernie Gewirtzman, who was foreign editor of the Times, told me a long time ago that before the internet, you only heard from government officials and a few rich folks in countries who would have access to stories as a foreign correspondent. The stories that you wrote as a foreign correspondent, they would run in America, but very few people would see them back. But now you can hear from almost anybody at any level
right away. Yeah.
And criticism and critiques are part of the relationship of the foreign correspondent to the local community changed when the web was able to show their work in real time as opposed to days or weeks or months later.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin, and have a
my pleasure.
Great Sunday. And everybody, thank you for watching. We're on Sundays, 8:30 to 10 a.m. And as soon as we're off the air, this will start on all those channels: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and on digimentors.group. And for those of you who watched on Instagram, welcome as well. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.